Welcome to the Tech for Good podcast. This is the HR Tech season. I'm joined today by Trish McFarlane, HR technology analyst, consultant, writer, podcaster, top 100 HR technology influencer, former HR leader, etc., etc., etc. We have hit the big time today, obviously. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me on the show.
How could I not? I put a post up of four white guys and 50 people tagged you and said, you need to get the real deal on.
Well, that was an interesting post. It's funny because I wasn't someone who would have commented on that.
It was
Not
mainly white
because I
men.
think you know what? It's fun. I think people in the industry tend to get worked up about a lot of things, and I tend to just try and keep heads down and do work and stay out of the fray of the gossipy sort of stuff. But I did see it, so thank you for having me on the show.
No, it's great. Great to have you. So, I suppose when we interview somebody with your depth of experience, the challenge is always like, how do we get the best bits out within half hour period? So that's my challenge today. So I don't want to go through your whole career. You were in HR for a long time. You worked your way up to that point. Talk to me about, let's start with talking about buying technology. What do you have to do as a HR leader? What's the where does it start? What's important?
That's a great question. And for me, I happen to be really lucky in that the first 10 years or so of my career was spent at PricewaterhouseCoopers. And so we were going through buying technologies on a fairly regular basis, both HR systems as well as, little point solutions at the time. So I just happened to be in the right place at the right time and learn the importance of it at a very sort of young junior age. And then had the luxury of, I don't think it was a luxury at the time, the luxury of going through selection and implementation many times. And then did so throughout my HR career. For me, I think it's gotten easier over the last 20 years, though, because back then it just didn't seem like there were any resources to teach you how to do that. If you were maybe starting your career in human resources and really any line of business, right, where you're buying technology. But now I think that it's really interesting because if you're working in human resources specifically and you have some sort of a problem you're wanting to solve for, or maybe you're thinking 3 or 4 years out, there are so many different resources online that you can now go to and actually learn how to go through a selection process,
What's your
learn how to go through implementation.
where do you go? Like, let's say you didn't have all this knowledge, like, and you were to advise somebody who was like at the, like, they've just been given a massive budget. Where do they
Yeah.
start?
So obviously, there are the large analyst firms, the Gartners and the Foresters and so forth out there who, you can actually pay for consultants to come in and walk you through every step of it. And I've been through those sort of scenarios in my career. And then I think, though, at some point, if you spend enough of your own time out there researching how to select technology, it's not, I don't think it's one site, but I would say this: there are so many resources, first and foremost, on the vendor sites now.
Hmm.
So if I'm in HR and I don't know where to go first, I would start looking at the blogs and the resources on all the various vendors, all the big ones. So SAP, Oracle, Workday, Ultimate, any of those are going to have. ADP has great resources. Start there. There are plenty of articles written, checklists that you can use. Um, that's a first step. Then I would say also look at some of the major analysts and speakers in the space because, myself included, I think we all spent a lot of the last 10 years putting out articles and information on how to buy technology. What should you be looking for? The one I would say people I think don't think of naturally is SlideShare. So I go to slideshare.net whenever I want to see sort of what the latest and greatest is because when people present, so pick any presenter in our industry, it doesn't always wind up on YouTube because it's not always recorded. But quite often, people will put their presentations on SlideShare. So you can actually go out there and if you search implementation or selection, HCM selection, those sorts of things, you're bound to come up with some presentations with information on exactly what you need to go through the steps, or at least how to start thinking about it.
All right, big question now. Double-sided question. So I'm going to put you on the spot.
Okay.
So, um, what are the three or four big problems that people are trying to solve out there in HR tech right now? And if you could choose one of them, how would you solve it?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. I'm going to fall back on the first and the biggest one, in my opinion, both from when I was a practitioner to when I was working for a vendor in product. And even now as an analyst, it's still core HR. That's where I would invest my money first. I would make sure that I'm going through and looking at how do I make sure that I am paying equitably, that I am coming up with compensation when people are hired that is fair for their skills, and to make sure that when I'm bringing them in, I'm bringing them in a good position. Because I think for so long, people have not done those sort of early steps properly, or they don't have the technology and tools in place to do that properly. So then they continue to play catch up for the next 3 or 4 years. I've walked into so many jobs where, people on my team aren't being paid properly, and then I have to like try and make up for it over years. So that's probably the first problem I think people don't address right away. Secondly, I would say it's around inclusion. And I don't mean specifically diversity and inclusion, I mean inclusion of everyone. So I've seen so many companies where they skip the onboarding. They might even have a solution and they don't use the technology to their advantage to actually make people feel connection from day one, and then all the micro connections. So they focus on the big, kind of the big rock moments. I'm hired, I'm assigned to a manager. Now I get an annual review, whatever, right? It's sort of like things that happen maybe once a year.
Hmm.
Instead, I would say a big problem is onboarding and making those micro connections that someone's going to feel every day. Um, Third, I think third for me that people should focus on would be the problem of accessibility. Over the last year to 2 years, I've spent more and more time talking with HR leaders who don't feel like they understand how to approach making their workplace accessible, both for people with different types of disabilities. I think we primarily think of like physical disabilities, we're going to make physical accommodations, but really, and hopefully what we see out of the pandemic is that people spend more time thinking about accessibility and technologies to support people's mental needs, their emotional needs, their social needs within the organization. Maybe if they do have some sort of physical impairment also that isn't being addressed, technology could help there. That's probably my top three, I would say.
Can you speak a little bit to the advancement in technology and changes since COVID has hit and the challenges that that now brings to organizations?
Well, actually, the advancements have been surprisingly huge. And I will say this, the caveat is, when we're recording this, we're still a month or two away from many of the vendors kind of announcing their spring releases with some of these. So I'm kind of getting hints of them from the vendors right now. But that said, I would say the biggest theme I've seen is vendors were able to quickly adapt to having their teams remote, and they got surprising amounts of innovation and building done on their products. And this is across the board, whether it's an actual suite, HR suite, or again, even some of the point solutions or even startups.
Mm.
I think it's because during pandemic, they've had more focus time and they weren't pulled in as many directions, maybe.
We all have.
That's just a theory, right,
Yeah.
that I have. But for an HR buyer, I think it's going to be, again, maybe in a month or two, we'll even know more, but I think it's going to be incredibly um, easy to start getting technology solutions for some of the problems that people have had during pandemic from an organizational standpoint, which might be um, that lack of connection, right? Not just from an onboarding perspective, but just throughout your day. How to deal with sort of being zoomed out, if you will, right? We're tired of being on camera all the time. So I think that using technologies and maybe features and functionality in your existing technology solutions
Mm.
that maybe you didn't buy the solution, right? So you don't even know what it can do that hasn't been toggled on. I find that all the time. So if I'm in HR, I'd be thinking of going back to all my vendors that I currently have before I even think about buying something else and saying like, what is it in your solution I'm not even using that would be
Mm.
really helpful in connecting my remote workforce or helping them as they come back? You'd probably be surprised at how many features you're not using that could actually help with that.
Let me take you back to the question I asked you about
Sure.
the solution on equity. I think you answered. Okay, so you've invented this thing, you've got an MVP, got a bag of money, you're excited, you have all this experience, right? So you know the industry. How'd you
Mhm.
go about selling it? What do you do?
Like, what would I buy?
No, you're now on the other side. You've
Oh,
done
I'm
your
on the other
MVP. You're on
side.
the other side. You got your MVP. You've actually got a workable product, right?
Oh,
And
sure.
like you've solved this one problem that you've identified, like, and you're really proud of it. How do you go about utilizing all your knowledge now on how you go about selling that to all the HR companies around the world at scale?
I think my first step would be to just research my buyer because by and large, that does not happen. The sales teams, and I will say this across the board, just about every vendor I've done business with as a buyer or worked for, kind of on the other side. Um, I think that sales teams need to really make sure that they understand what that business does, what that person's role is, and how they're going to influence what needs to happen.
How can
Because
they do that?
without that, you're not going to sell the product. It doesn't matter what it is.
How can they go about that?
A first step is LinkedIn. Or just, sort of socially stalking someone, right? Find out as much as you can about who is going to make the decision in that business. I can't tell you how many times I had people trying to come to me selling me things I absolutely didn't need.
Mm.
They had no idea. And this is again back as a practitioner, right? As a potential buyer, they would have no idea. They wouldn't even have looked me up to know that maybe I'm a writer or expert on some of these very technologies and these very problems. And yet they'd be coming to sell me. And they just give you sort of the standard canned pitch. Ditch all that.
Yeah,
Ditch the canned pitch, right? Make it individual and specific. Because again, these deals can be $100,000, $1 million, $3 million, right? If you're really thinking about selling properly. I think it's just using good sales practices, really, and believing in your product. I had too many salespeople who really didn't know more than the features and functions of a product and not how it could actually help the person buying it.
so once they've done their research and
Mhm.
they understand the person, they understand the product, they understand the pain point, what do they do then? Is it like, has the world changed, do you think, in terms of, like, it seemed to be a big thing to go to the HR Tech conference. Like, is it gone
Mhm.
online now? Is it like, do you have to get like channel sales distribution in there, or like, what? How does that ecosystem work to get access to somebody like you, who can then influence other people? I'm curious
Oh,
on
that's
how
a
that
great
whole
question.
chain works.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll give you an opinion on how the HR Tech conference works. Um, I don't I don't work for them, but so typically, the analysts are invited in to excuse me, to attend and have briefings with the vendors. But to be honest, I have to say my approach is a little different and it has been for years. I actually hate doing it that way. And I do all of my briefings by early September before any conferences start. I've already talked to every vendor because I want to have at least an hour with every single one of them. And
Mm.
that way, when people are connecting with me, whether it's, if it's an HR pro out in the middle of Timbuktu who wants to tweet me and ask me a question, or email me, or connect with me on LinkedIn and ask me a question about what they need to do. Because I don't do that kind of consulting. I know a lot of analysts charge for that. I don't do that. That's not kind of my game. But um,
What's your
I
game,
think it's
Trish?
I primarily work with the vendors on product roadmap, product strategy, marketing strategy,
Fascinating.
because I feel like I've spent my whole career being on the other side, being the buyer.
Yeah,
So I really don't want I c- I could be hired to implement technology, but I hate it. I don't want to do that.
yeah.
I've done it too many times. So for me, I'm on the other side. I'd rather help the vendors understand how to bridge that gap between a potential buyer.
What's your
And it
favorite
is
part of
by
your job?
being more, pardon me?
What's your favorite part of your job now that you're on this other side?
Oh, I'm a dreamer. So I like to dream up crazy ideas of what I think a product should do. and then get a whole team of people, developers to make it reality. So when I worked, I spent a little over a year consulting with Infor, for example, and then wound up working for them for another 18 months after that, heading up global HCM strategy, product strategy. And that was the best part of the job. And that's still what I get to do, but now I can do it for multiple vendors, which I love even more. Um, it's thinking up like, hey, this thing out here does not exist.
Yeah.
It should exist. What if it exists? Can you build it?
Yeah.
And so that's what I have the most fun doing.
Let me unpack that a little bit, because that's a bit of a complex role. Um, how do you dream up what they need at this stage? Like, do you have to go and sit down with like groups of HR managers and go, what's the current problem? Or do you intuitively know it? Or like,
Both. I think there's many layers, right? So part of it, HR doesn't move that fast, actually. So having spent almost 20 years doing it,
yeah,
I have a laundry list of problems, that I still think have not been addressed and from my own career, right? So that's part of it. And then it's just those years I spent working in HR, I built such a community of HR leaders that I was talking with on a regular basis. And that was primarily through when I was blogging 7 days a week, or at least 6 days a week. I don't have time to do that often anymore, but so I still have that community. Um, Back in, I guess, 2009, I started the HR Evolution Unconference with some other gentlemen in the space and built a huge community there. So I constantly get feedback from those people who are still working in HR. And it's just listening, being a good listener. Every time I'm on an airplane, every time I was, at an event, it's just, sort of standing in a hallway, just listening, just listening. What are people complaining about? What are they saying that's difficult that shouldn't be difficult?
mm,
And then trying to solve for that. So I'll give you an example of one that was really important to me. I still don't think people have quite nailed this one yet. So if any vendor wants to like jump on my idea, please take it. When I worked in healthcare, we had nurses who might be ER nurses, for example, but they wanted to pick up extra hours. And so they had options to be working in the OR at one rate of pay. They had options to work on the call center for another rate of pay, maybe, out on a floor for another rate of pay. I would love to have a tool that models forward because payroll still looks back.
mm,
Right? It's always rear view. It's always like, well, what do my taxes look like? Or what do my deductions look like based on certain things I've done? I wanted a tool that can truly model forward so that employees can actually plug and play different employee scenarios to decide what decisions to make about the work that they want to be doing. Now,
wow,
some of the tools sort of do that,
yeah.
but I would love to have some tools that actually do that to where people can really make better choices about the work assignments they accept. And I think that'll be more important as the gig economy continues to become more a part of everyone's lives.
You're forcing me down a rabbit hole now. But
You can jump back out. We can talk about something else.
let's talk about the future of work then.
Okay.
What do you think? What do you think it looks like for? Well, you've got. Is it young boys you have?
I have a boy and a girl, twins that are 17.
Okay, so they're going to be entering the workforce after uni,
Mhm.
probably. What's that going to look like? Are they going to like? Do you, like? Are you fearful for the employment world for them, or like, or do you think maybe it's the generation after that? Like my kids are 3 and 2. I can't even imagine what it's going to look like for them.
Yeah.
We're like, given all the changes that are happening, what do you think?
I will tell you this. I think I've always been really excited and an optimist about the future of work. And before I answer the specific question, I want to just give a little background. So, when I left my corporate job at PwC and I took another HR role, and that one doesn't even really matter. I mean, I was doing HR, right? It's like an HR director. At that point, I couldn't figure out exactly what the future was going to look like, but I knew that I was not ready for whatever it was. And so that's when social media was new. That's when, going online and having relationships with people was sort of blossoming and new. And my only thought was, I just need to put myself out there and spend as much time that I'm not at work retraining and reskilling myself because no one else is going to invest in me. And I remember a conversation with my dad because he's like, "What are you doing? You're staying up till 3 in the morning. You're getting up at, early hours and writing every day. Like, what are you doing?" And I said, "The jobs of the future, we just can't predict. So you just have to ready yourself." So back to the question, I think I'm really excited about the future of work for my kids and yours. We just need to teach them that sometimes you have to do the status quo just because that's what you're taught, right? You have to go to school in a certain way typically because that's just what it is. But it doesn't mean that you can't train yourself outside of that in other ways. And that's what I try and really teach my kids now. So I'll give you an example. Yeah, they have school, which is great, but we also do masterclass at masterclass.com. I'll have them, I'll give them a famous author to listen to or someone in something other
The
than
curriculum.
what they know already or something. I do it myself. I might go listen to a scientist talk for an hour and then try and sit down and just brainstorm, how does this really apply to the future of work? Because they're not making that connection, but that's how a futurist would think,
Yeah.
right? Or I might go listen to, I'll tell you one I did recently was with it was on performance with Usher, the singer, the
Okay.
entertainer, right? Someone might not think that Usher knows crap about HR, and he probably doesn't. But I went and listened to all of these sessions that Usher was teaching about how to be a good performer, a good entertainer. And then I went and sat down and kind of brainstormed, like, okay, now what would that really look like in the world of work? So I would just say, if
You've like a
you're
world
listening to
class
this,
athlete
yes,
mindset.
pick anything outside of HR. I think the biggest problem in our industry is everyone only focuses on talking to people in HR.
Mm. Yeah.
Don't talk to people in HR. It's part of it. Or you as a podcaster, right?
Yeah.
You were telling me you've had all these guests, right, that are in HR. Go get guests that are not in HR. Talk to
Yeah.
people who have nothing to do with it because that's where you're going to find out what the pain points are.
Yeah.
An HR professional only knows what they know. But if you go ask an employee who has no idea about HR, what's hard about work? What's great about work?
Yeah.
That's where the learning I think that's where the learning comes. At least that's where it helps me come up with new ideas.
Who inspires you in the HR tech community?
Oh gosh. Several people. Um, the first that came to mind is Dave Ulrich. He's still, he's been a professor for so long. He's written so many books, but he doesn't inspire me for sort of the reasons I think other people might find him inspiring. What I'm inspired about with him is that he's always pushing the envelope. So again, back to it doesn't really matter the topic that he covers. It's more that he's not afraid to just do something completely new that no one else is talking about. I love that. Um, Peter Cheese in the UK with the CIPD, um, getting to sit down with Peter and just chat about like, what do you think about technology? What do you think is coming next? And I don't mean just like going on the CIPD website and like looking at what they officially say. It's like picking people's brains like that who are getting to talk to tons of organizations, tons of high level leaders about what's really happening in the world. So he's a good inspiration for me. And honestly, I'm gonna say my dad because my dad spent, a whole career working in manufacturing, and I always find that when you have someone who inspires you who worked in a completely different industry, had completely different problems, hearing how they approached it because to me, again, like I mentioned, the HR moves slow. I think people move slow, right? We're all resistant to change to some degree. If you talk to your family members who worked 20, 30, 40 years ago. Unfortunately, sometimes it's not that different now. Not really. Not at how people are motivated or what causes people happiness or pain or whatever. So, yeah, I think my dad, he helps me a lot with just thinking about things differently.
What one piece of HR tech out there is going to change the world?
I'm going to say I don't know if it's one piece, but it's the more accessible that technology becomes, That's what's going to change the world, because our world right now, anyway, seems like most of the problems are focused on how different we all are.
Mm.
And that's why people aren't included. People of all types, of all abilities, are not included. And we hear so much about inclusion and how to do that. But really, I think the technology is going to be what enables that. And it really is about making everyone feel like they have access to the knowledge held within our organizations. And right now, they don't. They don't feel included. And they being a little bit of all of us.
All right, Trace, that is us today. Where can people find you? Where can they listen to you?
Well, I'm everywhere. Probably Google's the easiest way to find me, but no, I'm on Twitter at Trish McFarlane, LinkedIn, Facebook, all the kind of standard places. And I do the HR Happy Hour podcast. So you can find us on iTunes or Stitcher or Spotify or wherever you get your favorite podcast.
Thank you so much. Really great guest.
Thank you.